submarine fans, it's Eric with the Subvet.com with another podcast with Commander Ian Whitehouse from the United Kingdom. He is from Cornwall, England, where he presently is right now, and you see him on the video. And today is our second part of our three-part discussion, and we're going to be going over the Perisher. Let's read a little bit about the Perisher. The Perisher course is secretive, highly competitive, and built to be tough. The Perisher is designed to be tough. Entry is highly competitive. Success or failure is decided by the teacher, whose word is final. There's no appeal and no second chance. Those who fail are unlikely ever to serve at sea in a submarine again. The art of science of naval command has traditionally been passed on from captain to captain through the tutelage of mentoring. Cook and Nelson in particular trained many junior officers who went on to illustrious careers in the Royal Navy. This system began to break down in World War I when they were expanding the fleet, and high loss rates meant that submarine commanders and vessels unlike anything they have known were able to learn on the job. In 1917, the Admiralty introduced a formal course of instruction in submarine command, which continues today. It eventually became famous as the toughest leadership program in the world, and the high failure rate made it known as the Perisher. Commander Ian Whitehouse, Royal Navy, submarines retired. How you doing today, sir?
I'm fine. It's a good day in Cornwall. A little hot, a little humid, but we're hacking it.
Yeah, we're still in the hot August. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and there's 7-hour time difference, but I think we're on the same level. What would you call it? The
latitude.
Yeah, latitude. Yeah. So we're probably in the same line. We have the same weather patterns. Well, of course, I got the mountains to deal with, but yeah, it'll be getting cold here in another month, at least at night for sure. Yeah. So
absolutely.
I'm glad you can join me. It's late at night for Commander Whitehouse here, so he's going to be talking today about the Perisher course, the famed Perisher course. I did put out earlier the 1980 version of the Perisher. And a few days ago, I put out the newest version, which I think was on the BBC around 2014, 2015. So you can see the stark differences. And Commander Whitehouse is going to tell us about his experience. And where we left off in show one was you were on, I don't know if it's a Spartan or you were second command on another boat.
I was second in command. I was on a diesel submarine called Olympus.
So he's on Olympus. He wanted to get into the action down there in the Argentine with the Falkland War. He of course didn't do that, but all of a sudden he gets a message that he's approved to go through the Perisher course. So tell us, about that day when you got the message, how you felt. I mean, obviously you applied for it, and then
well, in fact,
go ahead.
The strange thing about Perisher is you do not apply for it.
Oh, really? Okay.
You cannot put your hand up and say, I want to do this. You must be selected by somebody else.
Okay, so I was thinking we were on your Navy career. Oh, your Navy career is managed, so that
it's managed, and there's an expectation that you will go to Perisher, but the exact date and the Perisher course you go on is not in your gift.
So that's wild.
there's no application. There's no form to fill in and sign saying yes, please put me on Perisher.
I don't know if that's true on our XOCO pipeline. I don't know if it's the same thing, but that's interesting.
I'm sure there will be similarities because it all depends on the confidential officer reports. Does your current commanding officer think you're good enough to go on Perisher?
I had an officer explain that.
There's already a filter. Mm-hmm. There's already a selection process before you get to the course. I was selected in April '82, as you said, Eric, just as the Falklands War broke out. And what would normally have been a highlight for a junior officer in submarines, it was still a highlight, but there was a slight disappointment as well because some of my colleagues were going south.
Right.
And I would have liked to have tested myself in that real environment. Could I hack it in a shooting war? Yeah. And I think anybody who's ever been in the military knows that exercising is fine, but doing it for real is better.
Your real job to be in the military is to be in military action. I mean,
and that's it. Yeah. And we all want to test ourselves in that military action.
Right.
So a little bit about Perisher history. You mentioned it. It's said to be one of the toughest military courses in the world. I would say that. I think perhaps some of the special forces, with SEALs in your Navy or the Special Boat Service, Special Air Service in my military colleagues would perhaps differ, but it's certainly a tough course.
Right. The
origin is not totally clear. I think initially it was probably a corruption of Periscope weeks, because that's what it was initially termed. An aspiring captain spent some time on Periscope weeks learning how to be a captain. So Periscope became corrupted to Perisher, but of course it also started to refer to the pass rate.
Did that come with a usage or doctrine on how to use the Periscope and target analysis?
That's right. The early days was very, very much an experienced captain would show his colleagues in a training course how he would carry out an attack. There was no written doctrine. Gradually it became consolidated and did become written down. The pass rate back in the day used to be around 50%. It's now closer to 60%, but it's still a tough course. And it's estimated, we don't have totally perfect records for Perisher, but it's estimated that just over 1,200 officers have passed Perisher in the Royal Navy since it started 100 years ago in 1917. So it makes it a pretty exclusive club, and one I'm hugely proud to be a member of.
Right.
What I'm going to do, Eric, if this is okay with you, I'll sort of talk you and your viewers through the course that I took and my experiences in it.
Yeah, you just go ahead. I'll try not to interrupt you while you go through this. So go ahead. Okay,
it's basically a 6-month training course. Quite a bit of it's ashore with various academic and visits to appropriate establishments. The core of the course is a 4-week period at sea practicing attacking, and then another 3 weeks at sea in an exercise war scenario. So we start off, we join the course, there's a couple of days of orientation and socialization and getting to know your colleagues, and then we spent 4 weeks in a shoreside attack team trainer using simulations, videos and computer generated images to learn the basics of attacking. The attack team trainer was then mostly staffed by young Wrens, that's female ratings, who at that time weren't permitted to serve at sea. But they spent about 2 years servicing or supporting the attack team trainer, and having seen so many dummy attacks by so many trainees and command teams, these young women had a great insight into the tactical challenge. Right. And I've no doubt they could have carried out very competent and skillful attacks themselves.
Absolutely.
They were certainly better than we were to start with. They knew what to do. Every evening, after a day spent in the attack team trainer, we would sit with teacher who would dissect the day's performance, both as a group, because we were working as a team. There would be the duty captain, but somebody would be playing the XO's role, somebody would be playing the navigation plot role, and so on. And he'll talk us through aspects of command and leadership and attacking as he saw them and had experienced them. This was pretty relaxed and anecdotal discussion, very often with a can of beer in hand. It helped the learning process, and it allowed us to put forward our own ideas and our own views, and it was very much like a university tutorial session. We were exchanging ideas, and it was a graduation, if you like, moving from junior school to the senior ranks of command qualified submarine officers. It was a really good opportunity to test ideas. Then, of course, we went to sea, the 4 Periscope weeks at sea. This is the core of Perisher. This is where it's make or break. We would spend 4 weeks at sea, but we weren't at sea throughout that time. We were berthed ashore in a hotel or accommodation. We would take a boat transfer at 5 o'clock in the morning to join the submarine at 6, and then between 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, we would take turns in leading attacks on ships. We'd start with a single ship attack, which is pretty easy, and we'll culminate in the last week with multi-ship attacks, a target and 4 escorts. Each student would carry out between 70 and 80 attacks, dummy attacks, over that Perisher period. Right. The process required the trainee captain, and he'd be on watch, if you like, during that dummy attack for about 30 to 40 minutes, It required the trainee captain to maneuver the submarine into an attack position, all the time observing the targets and the escorts to understand the threat and the danger, and ultimately to avoid the escorts and press home the attack. Essentially, we were facing a World War II problem: how to attack a target protected by an ASW screen. It wasn't something that we were really very likely to be doing, but by being tested and proving capable of doing it was a great way to assess our potential as submarine captains. Although, whether it's coincidentally or perversely, of course, one of our colleagues, just before we started Perisher, had in fact carried out a visual attack on an enemy ship, the Belgrano.
Oh, really?
So HMS Conqueror, of course, HMS Conqueror was down there trailing the Belgrano, and when the rules of engagement were changed, engaged the ship and carried out the attack. And the people I know that were aboard Conqueror at the time tell me it was carried out in an almost textbook Perisher fashion. All the lessons that we had learned had been imbibed and were used during that attack. During the attacks we were carrying out as a Perisher student, we had very limited computer and fire control support. Much of the picture and the effort was all in the captain's head. He had to maintain his mental picture in his head, and that was part of the testing. And a lot of it was about mental math as well, instant calculations. Ranges were assessed by measuring an angle subtended by a known height on the target. That had to be computed and turned into a look interval, which was a time within which the ship must be looked at again to ensure it hasn't penetrated a notional safety circle around the submarine roughly 1,000 yards in diameter. And the trainee would be using several stopwatches, a wristwatch, the control room clock to keep track of these different look intervals. So if I can just try and run through the process.
Yeah, go ahead.
The submarines at sea, somewhere just over the horizon, there are a number of ships which it's going to have to attack. So the student raises the periscope and carries out an all-round look. So 360 degree sweep around, takes between 20 and 30 seconds, and that 20 and 30 seconds the captain has to form a mental picture of the surface plot. Once he's got that picture in his head, he briefs the team. So it'll be: listen up, I have 4 ships, 1 heavy, stand by, Mark 8 attack, 4 torpedoes, 1 hit, sea height is 3 feet. That's a sort of mantra. It sets a scene and everyone in the control room knows the aim. Next step, periscope goes up again, stand by, target set up. The navigator manning the plot will give an indication of what relative bearing the target will be on. So the periscope goes up on the right bearing. Raise the periscope, the captain sights the target, confirms the bearing, presses a button, bearing that and ranging that. The periscope reads out the bearing and the angle measured on the known height. The captain then has to mentally calculate the range in yards. From that range he's calculated, he subtracts 1,000. He then calculates the closing rate of the target and determines how much time that target has before it reaches this 1,000-yard safety circle. So he'll come up and say, range 4,700 yards, 3 minutes, 36 seconds. Then he goes up again, standby, escort setup. Periscope goes up again, bearing that, range that, another calculation, another look interval allocated to that ship. And this continues until the target and all the escorts have been spotted, ranged, and a look interval allocated. And the captain's now carrying in his head a mental picture of all the ships and their disposition, a safety time for each ship, including the odd fishing vessel that might also be lurking somewhere out there. And that look interval, just to reiterate, he must look at the ship again within that look interval. Otherwise the ship could have penetrated the safety circle and could ram and damage the submarine. He's got a plan to maneuver his submarine into the optimum firing position. He's got to have an awareness of how the weapons team are doing in preparing the weapon system. And as he closes the target, so those look intervals reduce. You start off, I can look at it, I've got 3 minutes until I need to look at that ship again, so I can forget about that ship for 3 minutes. But as he closes the target, the look intervals reduce, sometimes to as little as 15 seconds, because the ship, one of the escorts, is so close to that safety circle around the submarine. And the periscope is now rattling up and down, so it's 15 seconds there, 15 seconds there. All the time, he must remember to carry out his all-round look, keep the surface picture going, and still manoeuvring the submarine, monitoring the weapon system, listening to control room reports, listening to the sound room reports, and anything else that might be going on. When the captain reaches the optimum firing position, he gives the order to fire. And at some point, teacher, who's been monitoring the progress of the dummy attack on another periscope, might instruct the target or one of his escorts to deliberately breach the safety circle. So as soon as that safety circle or the go deep circle is breached, the captain must take the submarine deep to evade. So his order at that point is full ahead, flood Q. Q is a ballast tank that can be instantly flooded, adding about 10 or 20 tons of water in the bow to drag the bows down. 10 down, keep 120 feet. And within 40 seconds, the submarine is 120 feet, but at the same time, the surface ship, having penetrated the safety circle, is about to roar over the top of the submarine. There's about 10 feet separating the keel of the surface ship and the top of the fin. This is close quarters stuff, and the adrenaline is running. And we did that day in, day out, 5 days a week for 4 weeks. And it was a lot of fun. I won't take away the stress. I'll talk about that in a moment. I won't take away the adrenaline, the gut-wrenching moments when you got it wrong. But it was also a little bit like being given or being inside a fantastic video game.
Oh yeah,
you know,
see that.
These children today, these young men, young women today, they play these fantastically lifelike video games. We were in the middle of the video game. Right. We were playing it with real ships. Now, if you go to sea in any or if you go on operations in any military environment, the one thing that is going to accompany you is exhaustion. You're going to spend days, weeks on patrol, at war. You will be exhausted. Right. So to simulate that exhaustion, we worked extremely long days. We were up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. We didn't get back to our accommodation until about 7 o'clock in the evening. Then we'd have time for a shower and some supper. And every evening, we were expected to stay up until about midnight. And we would be drinking, sometimes too much. And that was, I can't say it was encouraged, but it was sort of pressed upon us occasionally. And we'd be discussing tactics and we'd be learning. And all of those things came together to add exhaustion, add stress. Learning to get by on an average of 4 or 5 hours sleep a day for that length of time really starts to affect your mental resilience. And of course that was intended. It was to induce stress and test not just our knowledge and experience, but our attention to detail and ability to make decisions, make the right decisions when we are both physically and mentally exhausted. As the trainee captain's skills improved, then teacher would introduce other problems to be considered. He might get an engineer to come up and tap the student on the shoulder and say, we've got a problem with the starboard shaft. We've got to shut down the starboard shaft. And the student had to absorb that information and make a decision as to how he'd modify his attack or maybe call it off or whatever. On occasions, the trainee was so brought up in the moment, eyes firmly fixed on the periscope and that external picture, that he forgot to be aware of what was going on in the control room. And teacher would gradually send ratings and officers out of the control room until there was just 3 or 4 people left in the control room. And suddenly the captain would realize he was alone. Yeah. Because he wasn't maintaining the full picture. It wasn't just about the target. Teachers could fail a student at any time, which adds further stress. You don't know when teacher might tap you on the shoulder and say, that's it. Individuals would, of course, be aware of roughly how they're doing, and any group of people training together develop their own ranking system amongst themselves. They know that John is doing really well and Fred is struggling a bit, but you don't know who's really going to pass and who's really going to fail. We all have days when we thought, oh God, I've really blown it today. As you said in the introduction, there's no appeal and there's no second chance. Teacher's decision is final.
It's amazing.
And it's a high stakes poker game. Pass, and the next phase of your submarine career is assured. You're either going to get command or you're going to be appointed as XO of a nuclear powered submarine. Fail, and you may be looking for a totally new career, perhaps even outside the Navy. And I think I was in the right place at the right time, because I was still a bachelor when I took Perisher. Many of my colleagues were married with children, so they're putting not just themselves but their livelihood on the line for this opportunity, and that's an additional piece of stress that I didn't have to tackle, and I was very pleased not to have that big of stress. If a student was deemed to have failed, then the situation changed very quickly. The teacher would radio up for a boat transfer or a helo transfer, and when he knew the boat or the helo was standing by, he would call the student in, give him the decision. I'm really sorry, Joe, Fred, you have failed. It's time for you to leave us. The boat would surface. Teacher and the student would go to the casing of the submarine. Teacher would give the student, the failed student now, a bottle of scotch and would salute him. No, a bottle of scotch, and would salute him off the submarine. And that would almost certainly be the last time that student would be operationally in a submarine.
Unbelievable. Wow.
So I went from trainee to perisher in just over five and a half years. Some men had taken 7 years to get there. Nowadays it takes an average of nearly 10 years, just because of how training has changed. So you dedicated 10 years of your life to a challenge, and if you fail that challenge, that is huge, difficult to absorb.
That's all.
And all your friends have been in the submarine service, and for a while it's like a bereavement. If you meet a failed perisher, then the conversation is a little stilted to start with.
It's like, I'm sorry.
Because it's like a bereavement.
Oh wow.
Many would leave the Navy, but a few went on to have successful careers in the surface fleet. It's not by all means
Terminal.
an absolute guillotine, but it's tough. So having completed those periscope weeks, the survivors, and that was sometimes a term we used, you'd take a break with your wives or girlfriends and then return to prepare for COCEX, Commanding Officers Qualifying Course exercise. Many of your viewers will be Navy men. They know what an exercise at sea is like. Mm-hmm. Practice war, and we'd spend a further 2 or 3 weeks at sea in an exercise war situation. Each student would be commanding the submarine for between 24 and 36 hours at a time.
This is after you're selected, right? You've already made it to the course, and now you're on this.
This is still a pass-fail situation.
Okay,
so you've passed part 1, but you still have to pass part 2 as well.
Okay. Go ahead.
So, and the duty captain for 36 hours has to make all the decisions, not just tactical decisions, but ship-wide decisions. When to ditch gash, because that's clearly a counter-detection opportunity. Yeah. When to snort to recharge the batteries, because you've got to keep the battery power up. You need the energy. When to swap out the weapons. When to pump, slop drain and sewage. These are domestic details. Mm-hmm. When to get to periscope depth to take a broadcast. All these things must be in his mind, against a background of being tasked to lay a dummy minefield in shallow waters, make an underwater rendezvous with another submarine, carry out a special forces operation and land special forces paddling ashore in canoes onto an enemy shore, perhaps whilst also evading from enemy ships and helicopters, or simply getting out of the way of a fishing fleet of trawlers with their nets extended. And it was, again, adrenaline inducing, but incredibly exhausting as well. The one thing it's probably worth stressing, the Navy invested a huge amount in our training. So for 6 students, there'd be the submarine and teacher on which the course was being conducted. There would then be the target and the escorts that we played with during the periscope weeks. Then when we got onto the dummy war, there would be helicopters, maritime patrol aircraft, warships, some special forces loans so that we could practice landing special forces.
Right.
In my time, nearly 40 years ago, it was estimated that each successful perisher had over £1 million spent on them. At the exchange rate going then, that was close to $2 million. If you multiply it up by inflation, we're probably talking £5 million these days. Yep. So there's $7 million per student. Just an example of a non-tactical issue that occurred on a submarine I was in. One duty captain, not me, had taken over from another duty captain, also not me. His predecessor had failed to listen to the XO's recommendation to pump, slop, drain and sewage, and the tanks were dangerously full. A third duty captain, again not me, took over and was not aware that his 2 predecessors had not listened to the XO about pumping, slop, drain and sewage. He discovered what this meant when he ordered a return to periscope depth at 1:30 in the morning, black lighting, so everything's totally dimmed down in the control room. You can barely see your hand in front of your face. It was a force 10 storm raging off the Scottish coast.
Oh boy!
And as he put the bow up angle on, you know what happens. Slop, drain and sewage overflowed into the control room.
Oh my gosh.
So you've now got a duty captain raging at everyone whilst he's trying to get a snort on to recharge the seriously depleted battery, get a signal away to report a tactical issue. He's trying to keep a good lookout on the attack periscope in a boat that's bucking and lurching in really high seas. And of course avoid the crew who are mopping up the foul, stinking water around his feet. And I think there's a phrase that many of us have sometimes used. It just is, some days shit happens.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what happened there.
Yeah,
Now that particular duty captain went on to have not remarkable, he is a remarkable man anyway. He went on to have an incredibly successful career in the Royal Navy, ended up as an admiral and very successful.
Wow.
Yeah. Our submarine service, we, for a while in the Royal Navy, many of our senior officers had been selected from the submarine service because, as you know from your own experience, Eric, submarines at sea in the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s, when it was still the Cold War,
right, we
were at the front end of what was going on in the Cold War, the maritime Cold War certainly. And we sort of, this sounds self-serving, and I don't mean it to be like that, but the best and the brightest went into the most challenging part of the Royal Navy. And during that period, it was submarines. If you went back a generation, the most challenging part of the Royal Navy just after the Second World War was carriers and flying from carriers.
Right.
So there was a generation of senior officers that came out of carriers and fighter pilots. If you went back a generation before the Second World War, it would be gunnery officers. There's always a part of the service that attracts the best and brightest.
Makes sense.
In my time, it was probably the submarines. So at the end of the weeks at sea, teacher would call us students into the cabin and inform us one at a time of the outcomes. We could still fail at this point. It wasn't a guarantee. But he would tell them the result and he would give them their next appointment. On my perisher, 6 people started, 4 passed. I was lucky, I was the only one given an immediate command of a diesel submarine. The other 3 joined SSNs as executive officers, command qualified executive officers. So in summary, one perisher is it's just immense fun. It is stressful, it's tiring, it's exhausting, but it was immense fun and professionally incredibly satisfying. It's intended, intended to test and develop a wide range of skills. It's not primarily a test of an individual's ability to attack a screen target. That's a different issue. It's creating an attitude and a skill set that is essential for a submarine captain on patrol or at war. The captain on patrol or at war must always be aware of what's happening, whether it's above in the air, on the surface, or below the surface. He'll be juggling various options. He'll be assessing them, modifying them, rejecting some. Information will be coming at him from the control room team, the sound room, the engineers. These messages, this information has to be noted and screened out. He's got to make instant decisions, and those decisions have to be the right decision because it's you and your crew and the ship. And it might seem, in the way I've described Perisher and the way some people may have seen the different documentaries about Perisher, that the captain is alone in all this, and he is, but he does have a team. And certainly in UK submarines, the control room is a very quiet place. It's quiet deliberately to give the captain headspace to think. People only speak, only make a report when it's their turn to make the report. But at the same time, that team are analysing data, assessing target manoeuvres, and then filtering and passing quietly the relevant information to the captain to enable him to make the best decision. And if you like, it's a pyramid. There's a lot of data coming in at the bottom of the pyramid, and it's slowly being analysed and filtered and refined so that the captain at the top of the pyramid gets the information he needs to make the right decision.
Yeah.
So it's a supported team. And again, it's not just about decision making under pressure, albeit with that support of the team. Teacher will be looking for leadership skills, communication skills, calmness under pressure. And if you've watched the early BBC documentary, the 1980s one, teacher says the question he's always asking is he ready to take a submarine to sea in war? That was his mental test.
Question, yeah.
And that was the hurdle that you had to get over. Now, you know what submarine crews are like. They're not the most reverent of people. They're not the most respectful of people at times. And the crews of submarines carrying out Perishers always had a book betting on which student would pass or fail.
No kidding. I didn't even,
Absolutely.
That wasn't even the question I got. That's amazing.
And although we as students never ever got a glimpse of the betting book, I know it happened. It didn't necessarily happen in every single submarine, but it happens often enough. And this crew were invariably correct in their assessment.
Nope.
Sometimes they knew before teacher or the student who was going to come out top and who was going to fail.
Especially if you've seen it before, yeah.
They've seen, you know, if you've been a senior rate in a submarine for 10 years,
You've seen a couple.
you've seen all kinds of commanding officers, you've seen all kinds of officers. Somehow there's almost a smell, certainly a sense
put it together
of this guy can hack it, this guy's got it together. And that's how it is. Of course, the course has developed and changed. In the Royal Navy, it's now carried out in an SSN, a nuclear boat, and the Dutch Navy, with whom we used to collaborate a lot, now run a diesel boat version. But the aims remain the same, and the essential nature remains unchanged. It's an assessment, a very tough assessment, and the question that is being asked is this man, and I suppose one day in the future they'll be saying, is this woman, because we now take women to sea in the executive role, is this person ready to take a submarine to sea in war? And that's a hell of a hurdle to be faced with. both teacher, he's got to make that decision, and the student has to accept that decision and build on it. So that is Perisher. Great fun, great stress, exhausting, tiring, but it remains one of the defining moments of my life.
I can see that. But yeah, thank you for going through the whole Perisher thing. A few questions, as we go. First one, you don't have to mention his name. The guy that was involved in the Belgrade sinking, did he become a commander?
Yep.
That's good to know. It'd be weird. No, he didn't make it.
No, he made it.
He made it through. Okay. And so you said the first part, you get to know who the teacher is. So how's that interface start? I mean, obviously, the guy's an experienced captain or commanded a couple boats.
He's already had command of at least 2, maybe 3 submarines.
So,
let's say.
Is he pulled out of the fleet to become a teacher, or is he on a shore duty status, and that's what he does?
He would have almost certainly have probably just completed a command of a nuclear submarine, so he's current. But he will have some extra skill set where he's been seen to have a little bit extra on the leadership skills, a little bit extra on the teaching skills, because it is generally, he's an educator.
Right.
And some men might be fantastic commanders or leaders taking a ship to sea, but they may not be the ideal person to train somebody else to take a ship to sea. So again, it comes back to officer selection, and teachers, current teacher will be looking at the students, and he might say, oh, that one student there, he has potential to become a teacher. So his records will be flagged, and he'll be observed over the next 2 or 3 years, and then perhaps he'll be pulled out to become a teacher in due course.
That's it. One thing I saw too in the, at least the first documentary I saw, like before and halfway through, you guys don't wear your uniforms to a dinner. You actually dress up like gentlemen, and I guess you drop the ranks for it. Is that done on purpose? That you dress up in civilian clothing?
No. That was simply in the Royal Navy, formal dinners, formal occasions are still very much part of the tradition. Drinking a glass of port to the memory of Nelson, that sort of thing. So the week before the final week of the Periscope weeks, we would always have a formal dinner, because nobody would be deemed a failure until the last week. Everyone was given the chance to get through to the last week.
Oh, okay.
So we would have a final formal dinner with everybody that started present. And it just was polite, I suppose, and comradely and collegiate.
I just noticed, I mean, even if you go out at a formal dinner on the U.S. side, you're still wearing your uniform. You're wearing formal dinner dress with your little mini medals and stuff.
Oh, with the medals and badges of rank. There, on occasions, we will wear our formal mess dress with badges of rank and everything else. But
no, I thought it was I thought it was good that because you drop the formality of rank to act as gentlemen and interface. Because you can't talk you did. You drop the ranks and you talk about, like you said, about Nelson, the old days. So when you meet your teacher, does he become teacher from now on? That's how you call him, interface with them?
My teacher was a man called Commander Johnny Clark. He was a marathon runner when he wasn't being a teacher, which indicated the level of commitment and dedication he had. He ended up as an admiral. I still meet him when I go back to reunion dinners or other naval events.
That's good, yeah.
And my first thought on meeting him is not hello Johnny or hello Admiral, it's hello teacher. He is my.
So it's a lasting relationship.
It's still that's still that relationship.
That's pretty wild.
He's still there. And had I stayed in the Navy longer than I did, and had I had an issue or a problem I wanted to talk through informally, he would have been outside of my command structure, but would be somebody I could go to and say, look, I've got this thing, can we just chat about it? And I would tap his thoughts. I'd pick his brains, and use him as a mentor through my career.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Why wouldn't you do that? So he's like a constant go-to person.
Yeah, constant part, and respected.
So you said something, and anybody that's young might be listening to this and not been on submarines. You said it's like a video game, and I would say that's a lot true. The new submarine simulators are out. Actually, get down to the did you blow sands, or it calculates as part of the algorithms of the game. So it's so realistic. You got to calculate those things. Did you do that? Did you turn pumps up on it so you don't get detected? But I want kids to know that submarining very much is like what you've seen Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica. What's Star Trek? It's already like that underwater, especially with the newer submarines. With the
absolutely.
New system. I mean, because they've taken the periscopes up. You got the captain's chair, just like Star Trek and the Enterprise. When I went on the Eustis, Texas, first thing I said, this is like the Enterprise. You see, and it's exactly like a video game. So I want kids to know that, if you want to get into that, like be on Star Trek, don't think it doesn't exist. It already exists. It just exists underwater. So it's a career that you could chart a path if you're listening to this.
And just to add to that, Eric, if you're going underwater, you're boldly going where very few people have gone before.
Absolutely.
Just to quote Star Trek.
And it's just as violent. Underwater, I mean, you got the vacuum of space, you got the depth of pressure.
The pressure of depth.
Yeah, and you got another thing, water coming in. Okay, I mean, it's a number of things.
Oh no, you keep the sailors on the inside and the water on the outside.
That's the main thing.
That's a basic rule. I think you wanted me to talk also about my time in command. Is that right?
Yeah, I was going to bring up
carry on
some of that. Yeah.
But if you have any more questions, just crack on.
Yeah. So I mean, I was sent some questions, and I wanted to ask those too. But
yeah, by all means.
I wanted to finish up on the parachute. I have a few notes here. So now you used a lot of periscope work in the parachute that you were in. In today's version, they've taken that out of the
equation.
Equation, yeah. So they're not dipping a scope up because I saw on the first and second, the second one especially, they have equipment that can spot a periscope up to, I don't know, what did it say, 5,000 yards away? It was some ridiculous amount of yards that you go pick up a scope and boom, there it is. But now that equation's been taken out. So, I guess what I'm trying to get to, they purposely put you on. That's why they got two boats charging you, and you got to worry about that 1,000-yard thing. Plus, you've been up for hours and hours, and then they're throwing all the stress. And in the show, the '80s version, they put on headsets, where guys can't hear, and the guy didn't even notice. I thought that was funny. But I mean, it puts you under a lot of strain just to see how you act. And how was your interface with the crew? You think and you said they keep books on you. So how do you feel your interface was the crew? And
I've no idea what odds I was given, but I think I wanted to join submarines. Going back to yesterday's or the day before's conversation, I said I wanted to join submarines for a variety of reasons, but it was a small ship element. If you're one officer of 6 officers in a crew of a total of 65 people, you have a position that everybody knows you and you know everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I can't speak for how good a captain I was in the 2 commands I had. That's for somebody else to say.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
What I can say is that I remain in touch with a number of officers and crew members that serve with me, and a number of them have kindly in the past on social media, occasionally reunions, told me I was a good skipper.
Right.
That's an accolade I'm happy with. A good skipper.
And you went on to be a captain on the Onyx, so diesel submarine. Where the other ones, Onyx they went to XO roles, and you got picked to become a captain. I thought that was
yeah. I think that was probably because my prior experience had diesel boats in it. I was a pretty comfortable diesel boat man, so it made sense. There was only one diesel boat command to go, so let's give it to the man that understands diesel boats. And just moving on to Onyx, I was given command of Onyx 5.5 years after starting my training. I was on the bridge of Onyx as the captain, easing her away from the berth at Hasler Creek Gosport, which is the home, or was the home, of the Royal Navy's first submarine squadron. Oh. It's also where the first ever British submarine was berthed. That's where the submarine service started. Leaving that berth was a well-known tricky manoeuvre. You had to reverse out of a creek into a tidal way, and it was pretty tricky. New captains were always watched very carefully by the entire squadron, and many a submarine had either got it wrong, gone aground, or fallen afoul of a navigation buoy at that point. So it was a tense moment. I managed that first time without a hiccup. There were times subsequently when I got my ship handling a bit wrong when arriving or leaving a berth. I always found SSNs were much easier because SSNs are such pigs to handle in ship handling terms on the surface. We always used tugs to put us alongside.
Oh, okay.
So my job was just to get the SSN in the right port, and the tugs will do the rest of the work.
Did the diesels have port and starboard screws? Where the nukes only
diesels had 2 screws, so you're expected to be able to manoeuvre alongside without the assistance of tugs. But in heavy weather, the sail can take charge, and it can be a challenge.
When doing your target motion analysis, did you find any difference with 2 screws and a single screw? Like any advantages between one or the other, as far as maneuvering?
Not really, because if we were in a diesel boat patrolling quietly and listening passively to the surrounding ocean, we would often go down to 1 screw.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Power saving, and you would just circle very quietly using 1 screw, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm trying to roll out the movies. Yeah. In movies always show that. Hit the port screw or hit the starboard screw, shut it down, you turn real quick. But that's a lot of stuff in movies. And speaking of that,
you could certainly use the screws to make a very rapid turn if you needed to. But that would be if you were in a sort of underwater dogfight. You wouldn't be doing that just to sort out target motion analysis or anything like that. But the one thing I think I do want to say to anybody, and you're talking about young men thinking of enterprise or going into an exciting career, no matter what the training is, no matter how much preparation you've done, reading, thinking, there is nothing that prepares you properly for the first day in command. First love, first child, first command, they're all up there with the best things in life. I can't describe, and I foolishly didn't write down the end of my first day how I felt, but I can think back, and it was, I had this ship. I was master of everything I surveyed.
Master and commander, like that.
Master and commander, absolutely. Patrick O'Brien, fantastic books.
Yeah.
The other thing, once I got
Listen to me, I'm always saying movies and you're saying books. You see the difference in generations.
Oh, I enjoy my movies too. I run the film club in the village. Back in the 80s, back in the Royal Navy, when I took command, diesel submarines did play a full role in frontline operations, but they were also recognised as a less intense platform. So minor mistakes, occasional bump, engineering failures, they were never going to be costly or result in major damage because they didn't have that nuclear reactor in them. So young captains and my colleagues, we probably ranged in age from 29 to 33. So pretty young men to be in charge of a warship.
That is extraordinary.
We were, with our crews, encouraged to test ourselves and learn in the process. It was recognised that mistakes would be made, but we would learn from those mistakes. So we could do a lot of stuff. I think the other strange thing about command that is often not remarked on is the captain in a submarine is probably the only man aboard that doesn't have a specific task and role to play every day. He just has to be there for when the situation demands his command skills. But if you're passaging from port to another port, pretty quiet. So the captain would be reading, thinking, planning, whilst the officers and crew just ran the boat.
Yeah,
they
let
didn't
them do
need to
their
sit
job.
there.
Yeah, that
Just
sounds
let
entirely
crack on.
plausible and probably should happen. That should be.
So I perhaps I need to describe a diesel submarine, because many of your generation, Eric, in American Navy, US Navy, wouldn't have spent time in a diesel boat. They've seen the movies, but they're small, first of all, remarkably small, 2,000 ton displacement, surface displacement. They're incredibly noisy and cold when you're snorting, putting a charge on, or running surfaced. But they're extremely quiet when running on electric motors, and that still applies today. That's why we still have AIP or diesel electric submarines out there.
Lateral combat picture. Yeah.
They were horrible if you were running surfaced, because if you were running surfaced in bad weather, you were on an open bridge, the seas would break green over the bridge, you were wet, damp. Cold. We spent 2 hours on watch and 4 hours off watch, so your clothes never quite dried out properly. You climbed back into damp outfits to go back up on the bridge and get goffered again by green, shipping it green over the fin. The crew of 65 on a diesel submarine, many of them were old diesel hands. They didn't want to go into these smart, new, shiny SSNs.
Yeah.
They wanted to stay in their dirty, cramped submarine.
They're proud of it.
There was limited fresh water. Catering was mostly based on canned goods. The ethos, camaraderie and teamwork was based on a shared pride in being hardworking, gruffy, dirty, but supremely professional. And yes, to an extent, piratical. You know, I mentioned in that first conversation we had about being described as pirates who should be hung at wartime. Well, we still took a certain pride in that. And of course, it was an incredibly tight space where comfort of the crew came a long way second to the technology of the submarine. Bunks were shared, hot bunking, shared bunks was the norm. They were fitted wherever space could be made, so they'd be along in a passageway or beside the torpedoes in the after compartment. People would be sleeping on torpedo racks. You've seen all of this yourself, I'm sure. But diesel boats had a special stink. Men, cabbage, sweat, everything, diesel, it was unmistakable. And I'm sure it would have been recognised instantly by any World War II submariner, US, UK, or U-boat.
Universal
They would
smell.
have recognised that stink. One of the things as well, I mentioned it in the last conversation, but diesel boats, because of that slightly different approach to, how can I say, a greater degree of freedom was allowed. We could be a little bit more eccentric, and we had the characters on board. I remember we had a leading torpedo man whose name was Marshall. His nickname was Sheriff. So he always used to turn up and wear every day at sea a waistcoat with a sheriff's star, 2 holsters, two dummy 6 guns, and would walk around the submarine dressed as a sheriff.
Like, hey, Sheriff.
Okay, absolutely. There was another submarine where the chef took to wearing a tutu, a ballet skirt, tutu, when he was in the galley. Don't know why. He just wanted to do that. We had a coxswain, a bit like your chief of the boat. Coxswain was a senior non-commissioned rating, responsible for discipline, organisation, that sort of thing. But he was also responsible for catering on a diesel submarine. This particular coxswain was called Famine, or Fuller. He was known as Famine Fuller because he could get more slices out of a tin of spam than anybody else at all. He used to slice it with a razor blade, we thought. So these were the kind of eccentric people that we had. Onyx, when I took command, had returned. She had been the only diesel boat that went down to the Falklands. So she had carried out a fully operational patrol. She had landed special forces for real, and she patrolled off the Falkland Islands during that short but intense period.
Wow.
And when I took command, half the crew were still veterans who'd been down there. and they carried themselves with a certain swagger.
I bet they
and
did.
I had to prove myself.
They're like, who's this guy? He's called himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Diesel boat tasking was generally less onerous than for an SSM. We tended to only go to sea for 3 weeks maximum, maybe 4 weeks at a time. We turned around, and we did a lot of training exercises, both to exercise the submarine and its crew, but also to give surface ships experience of detecting and intercepting and attacking submarines. In our Navy, this was known as clockwork mousing. I don't know what the US Navy called it. It could be deadly boring for the submariners because we just went around a racetrack.
We played the mouse for AUTEC, and they kept having to close in because they couldn't find us. And we were an old boat, too.
Yeah, that's it.
They closed us into a 5 square mile. It was ridiculously small before they could find us.
Well, we used to do this clockwork mousing in the exercise areas just off the south coast of England. And occasionally a submarine would take advantage of the sandy seabed that we had there, and they would actually bottom the submarine. Mm-hmm. They very slowly and carefully would catch a stop trim just above the seafloor, flood a forward tank, and the bow would just touch on the seafloor, and we'd just sit there on the bottom. That meant we could stop doing pretty much everything, just a couple of watchkeepers in the control room. We could enjoy a meal, watch a movie, whilst the frigates were racing around us. They never found us, but we used to do just the games we played with the surface ships. Being small and agile, of course, diesel boats could operate close inshore.
Did you have an oxygen generator on board the diesels?
Yeah, we had oxygen generators. We didn't have the electrolyzers to split out water into oxygen and hydrogen. We just had oxygen candles, which are chemical stacks that, when heated, gave off
so you can
oxygen
under a little longer.
Very, very unpleasant
smell. Huh?
Atmosphere control in diesel submarines was, I wouldn't say it was amateur, but it wasn't supremely technical. The old diesel submarines used to take white mice to sea.
Yeah.
You must have heard this story. And if the white mouse, a bit like a canary in a mine, if the mouse,
I was just thinking that, yeah.
If the mouse got agitated, then it was time to perhaps change the air. In my day in a diesel submarine, if the captain couldn't light his cigarette, then it was reckoned the atmosphere was getting a bit rough, and we should go back up and change the air.
So you go to a nuclear boat as an XO next. So you're captain.
That's what I do next. Yeah.
So you went to a nuke boat as a captain.
As XO.
XO.
Yeah, having had command of a diesel submarine, I brought something else to the XO's job.
And was that the Sovereign you went to, or that's a boat you commanded?
No, I went to Trafalgar.
Trafalgar. So you bring this swagger with you that you've built up, because obviously watching all these characters, you obviously become part of the play.
Yeah.
And you bring this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's I mean, some diesel boat captains I knew, they would adopt a persona as well. They would adopt some eccentricity,
right,
that would mark them out in some way. They might drink and carouse with the crew, perhaps, in an effort to bond or develop that piratical bit. That wasn't really my style. I was a bit more distant, and I learnt with distance came up objectivity, I suppose. I knew every man on board. They knew me. My highs and lows were transmitted to the crew. Their successes were my successes. Was I a good captain? I can't know, as I said before. Yeah. But over time, it worked out for me and for the crew. I was never one of the boys, but I was one of the crew. I looked out for them,
obviously,
and they looked out for me.
I mean, I don't mean to interrupt, but obviously in your culture, alcohol is very much part of your culture. And, as U.S. Navy ships, there's no alcohol aboard. Did you ever see that as a problem, or did you?
No, there was an unwritten, in our nuclear boats, there was an unwritten rule, because it wasn't naval law, but there was an unwritten rule: we did not drink at sea.
Okay.
You might find an engineer coming forward, having had the watch back aft, where temperatures and humidity could get extremely high. He might have half a pint of very weak shandy, which would be about 0.1% alcohol in it. but broadly speaking, we didn't drink at sea.
And one of the
Diesel
tribes
submarine-
that shall go unnamed, they broke out the alcohol and we drank pretty much for 3 days. Maybe that's different because we were there for a missile op. I don't know, but it was crazy.
Were you alongside or were you at sea?
No, we went to sea with them. We ran the test instrumentation sets for because you instrumentate their tried missile out.
Yeah, I know. I know how those
so we.
DASOs and what have you.
Yeah, so obviously we instrumentate the missile out. We perform all that, do the range checks with the destruct pads and all that stuff, make sure that works, and then we make sure that when the missile spins up, we can read all the instrumentation before it leaves. So we got to be there. So it's kind of like a mini launch set for like the space shuttle, if you will.
Yeah,
I'd run a launch team like 4 guys, and they would make reports and feed it me, and I'd give it to the crew. But yeah, it broke out the alcohol.
I never actually served aboard an SSBN, but I do understand they had a slightly different approach in cultural terms to alcohol.
I think somebody told me they didn't do that. That wasn't normal. They just did that because we were on board, and
they may have been showing off and showing to the U.S. Navy.
It got a little out of hand. I got stories, but probably should say it
here. Drinking is part of the Navy culture, but it's far less these days. Far less these days.
Yeah, they're really cracking down on
and of course,
DUIs and stuff. That's a career
absolutely.
killer.
The year I joined the Navy in 1970, the Navy phased out what we called the tot, which was a daily ration of rum for every man over the age of 18 aboard every Royal Navy establishment. And a tot was 75 mil, so I don't know what that is, about 3 ounces, 3 fluid ounces of high proof rum. So nearly a 90 proof rum.
Enough to relax you when you go into the rack, of course, right?
Enough to relax you. It would put you over a drink driving limit.
Oh yeah.
And the Royal Navy in 1970 felt that giving everybody that amount of alcohol every day when we were operating nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons was probably not a good mix to have. So from 1970 onwards, that culture of alcohol in the Royal Navy started to slowly ease away. And these days, it's very much the exception certainly to drink at sea.
They might be phasing it out. I mean, cigarette smoking is completely phased out.
Cigarette smoking is completely phased out. And when I give my tours of a submarine, our preserve submarine here in Plymouth, people are amazed that we ever did smoke at sea in submarines.
Right.
Because there's such a no smoking culture, of course.
Well, of course, with the video game culture too, these kids operate. We call them kids, but they're 20 to 30. But they've grown up on the internet, and video gaming. And we grew up in a society where going out, hanging out with each other, that's how I relax. Where they're relaxing is playing video games with each other. Doesn't make sense to us older guys, but that's how they are. So.
Well, they do.
I mean, you brought up thing about the women too, and I wanted to, because women are serving in both navies, and I saw that part in the documentary, and I would agree with those women could probably be captains easily, because they were doing those simulations over and over and over, and they can tell you what you're doing wrong, what you weren't, but. I mean, it's a good shout out that women are completely capable of doing submarines. I know it's a big deal with a lot of people, but
women are physiologically and intellectually completely capable of operating at sea in submarines or flying jet aircraft or operating a tank.
Absolutely agree.
In the Army, I think there is still, and this is an old-fashioned man speaking, probably unreconstructed man. I still think there's a sociological issue.
That's where it's at.
That if you only take 10 women to sea in a crew of 110 and you're at sea for 100 days, it will create some stresses.
Yeah, something will break down.
And it takes an additional level of discipline to control those stresses.
And another thing the captain has to worry about.
It's another thing the captain has to worry about. And
even if you're a female captain, you would have to worry about that, so it doesn't matter.
Absolutely, you'd have to worry. So the Royal Navy has had problems. I know the US Navy's had problems, and I'm sure every Navy that takes mixed crews to sea has had some problems.
That's the only thing I can think of. I think the same way you. That's the only problem I can come up with is the social part. But the newer generation, they're probably
it'll be more normal.
They're not really.
It normalizes.
Yeah. For us, it's still maybe a little problem, but for them, I don't think they think of it as a problem like we do. Maybe not on the same level. So maybe in another 10 years, it won't even be a discussion.
I think it won't be remarked on. No.
Yeah,
that's right.
So I would agree. So I had a couple questions here. I wanted to ask you.
Please.
And you kind of said, how do you treat your junior warrant officers? And you kind of said that you let them run the boat. Your idea is, hey, if you're out on patrol, let me read my book. Don't bother me unless you need to, and let me think up some things.
Well, I think if we were on patrol, if we were operational, I would be taking a closer interest. But if we were just transiting and just operating the boat at 200 feet, steady steaming, steady state, why do they need the captain in the control room?
Complete confidence too. And the XO didn't really participate as much either, right? He kind of
that's right. Yeah.
So it's
but then come the time, come the operational necessity, come the challenge, come the problem, then of course the captain has to be there. He has to be exercising his command function.
Right.
But you don't need to exercise command function every minute of every day if you have a well-trained crew.
So, I mean, today's warfare underwater, I mean, obviously, it's still a warfare element when you go underwater. Because even though we're not at war with any country per se, we're still gathering intelligence on each other. So, can you call intelligence gathering war? Maybe a little bit. Because,
It's intelligence gathering in a submarine, where, of course, the intelligence we're gathering is positional and ships' signatures, sound signatures. To obtain those two items of intelligence means we have to operate close to potential enemies, potential future
and maybe
enemies.
Be places you're not supposed to be.
And perhaps be places you're not supposed to be. That's as close to war as you're going to get without actually launching weapons. Because in a war scenario, you're going to detect, intercept, track, and launch a weapon. In an intelligence gathering scenario, you're going to detect, intercept, and track. There's not a lot of difference between those two things. So, and of course, us special people, submariners, we're already operating in a hostile environment.
Yeah,
we are underwater.
You're underwater. That's what I tell people. They're like, "What's it like underwater?" I mean, is people trying to shoot you and all that stuff? I said, "That's the least of my worries. My biggest enemy is the water on the other side of that. A few inches of hole."
Exactly that.
It's hard for people to get that, but they say it themselves. There's no way I'd go on board a submarine. Well, the reason they wouldn't go because they don't want to go underwater. So the answer to the question, they just don't think about it. They think it through. Yeah. So the next question I had is that I guess this question is kind of like, who do you think is the best in? It says toughest to track and prosecute a submarine. Which service out of the United States, UK, do you think is better? You described what you did with Perisher.
Come on, you're lobbing us. I don't know whether that's a hard ball or a soft ball. There's only one answer I can give.
Of course, you're going to give. That's what I thought you'd say. The Royal Navy
is clearly the U.S. Navy is the biggest. I'll give you that. The U.S. Navy is the biggest navy in the world. The Royal Navy is the best navy in the world. That's all I can say.
There's not.
I would be unfair to my colleagues and my tradition and my history if I said anything else.
So that's the expected answer, I would, sir.
And just to add to that, the Royal Navy, the first Royal Navy, came into being in around about 897. When King Alfred the Great, you may just have heard of him in history lessons, I don't know.
You guys might have been around a while, yeah.
Alfred the Great commanded that 20 ships should be built to repel Viking invaders. So the Royal Navy, as controlled by a king, has been around for over 1,200 years.
I didn't know you guys started off your Navy repelling Vikings, but that makes sense based on some of the history that I've learned here. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's taking it a little far to take it all the way back to 897, but it's a reasonable point to make.
Well,
anyway, I don't know
along with that question is there fundamental differences in tracking and procedures? Just generic, not any OPSEC. Just is there fundamental differences? Do you think?
No. I think having spent some time aboard the Rickover, and obviously having spent a lot of time aboard different UK submarines, our tracking and trailing techniques are essentially the same.
So this is an expert, by the way, guys. That was part one. You spent 60 days on the Rickover, at least 60 days, right?
60, 70 days. Yeah, I can't remember exactly.
So you would be an expert to know the differences for sure. I mean, based on it's changed because warfare's changed because you got newer capabilities, but
our sonar capabilities broadly remain in parallel.
Right.
US Navy developments, UK Navy developments, narrow, low frequency passive arrays, towed arrays,
right.
flank arrays. We're using the same kind of equipment. There might be minor technological advances that 5 years the US Navy's a bit in advance on that one, then the UK Navy catches up.
The only difference I could tell is from my watching the documentaries. I mean, it's just the way you command a ship, the words you use when you're asking for reports or giving reports. It's just that's fundamentally different. If you'd have to watch some of the videos to get what I'm saying. But
I think yes, perhaps that goes back to what I was saying about the pyramid. A Royal Navy control room team is trained and dedicated to giving enough information to the captain that he can make the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trained to filter out distractions on the way up to that point.
Right.
Observing, and this is a data set of one, so it's not a great data set.
Okay, yeah.
Observing how it was carried out in the Rickover, there was a degree of respect for the rank of captain that I think I felt on occasions inhibited junior officers from making a suggestion. Because if the captain said the target's doing this and the navigator on the plot thought it might not be doing quite that, the navigator on the plot was not always confident enough to not necessarily contradict the captain, but to suggest an alternative to the captain.
Right.
Now that may have been particular to that boat and that captain's command style.
It seems like it's different.
And the training of his team. But it was a difference that I observed. So that sounds critical, and I don't mean it that way. But
that was a problem too in airplane crashes. Junior officers were always afraid to override the captain, and then they had to. There's a term for it, where cockpit sharing, where either one of them can make a major input to the final decision. And I would assume submarines kind of looked at that and said, there's senior enlisted, non-commissioned people that can make decisions, and say, and everybody should have a little bit of say in it and listen to your team because they got different experiences that you don't. But
that's right.
And
it's a teamwork. Yes, the submarine captain is in a unique command position, but he is still reliant on his team.
What was
to
your
feed
role
him
on
the information.
Rickover? Observation only, or they give you a command type sharing role, or?
I was what was called the command rider. I'd had experience of operating in the role that the Rickover was being tasked to.
Uh-huh.
I'd spent 2 years working out of naval headquarters in London, where I've been responsible for the intelligence plot in the North Atlantic and for managing covert submarine operations.
Right.
So I brought that expertise to the Rickover, and the idea was that I would give some training, some input, some support to the captain and to the control room team. So I set up a lot of training exercises and scenarios as we transited to the patrol area, and then in the patrol area I would help the XO compile the narrative, the war diary, if you like, the minute by minute, what we were doing, what intelligence we were gathering.
Right.
I might make suggestions to the captain that this is more of a priority target than that, because the bigger intelligence picture, the bigger data set that we needed would go in this direction or that direction. I had no command role. I was strictly advisory.
Right.
The captain was kind enough on occasions to not give me command, but at least allow me to dictate some of the maneuvers of the ship within the constraints of command and relationship and responsibilities. So it was a good working relationship.
And just to give people, I mean, because the UK and US, they pretty much share intelligence. So there was probably something the US was good at the time, that we had a liaison sharing with a submarine crew, if you would, over UK. I mean, doing the same thing.
I mean, when I was working in headquarters, running, as I say, the North Atlantic intelligence plot for submarines and running some of our covert operational patrols. Those covert operational patrols, we had a program that was totally integrated with the US Navy. And I had a US Navy officer working directly for me.
Right.
And we also had a US Navy officer in the headquarters who was, we called him the water manager. We would share the Atlantic. UK's working in that bit of the Atlantic, and the US is working in that bit of the Atlantic, and we don't want you to crunch into each other.
Yeah, why not?
And he would manage that picture. So there was a very, very close liaison. And when we went out to the States, when we went to Canaveral
I think
or
it's
Lauderdale
normal
or
that,
Alltech,
especially younger people, they always want to know who's the best of the best.
That's it.
Kind of like
We're
that
gonna
Top
share
Gun movie stuff.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, but you answered correctly. That's the way it should be answered. So, well, I guess the next a couple questions is going in. Today, and I know very little about other than what I read online. The new ways of prosecuting an enemy. With the newer tools. Obviously, everything's gone artificial intelligence, and you have data centers on submarines with internet capabilities, and they might have smart weapons that swim away from like Russia likes to brag about everything they got. That they got 2 Poseidon AI torpedoes capable of hunting warheads. I'm sure and gathering intelligence from the UK, like you said, that's what the Virginia class was built for, was Laredo combat areas. So these things are built to go into shore areas and navigate around objects, hover in place, if you will, and collect data. That's and the next generation, of course, are going to be autonomous underwater vehicles. We're not going to be manned. Won't even need a person there.
You won't even need people in them.
These things will fight each other at high speed underwater.
Well, it's all you were talking about, the young men who play video games. You could conceive of a situation where you don't go for a fighting war anymore. You just put your best video gamers against their best video gamers. And it's
kind of that way. They're sitting on the weapon right now, but you're right. There's going to be a standoff thing. So, I mean, how do you use internet cable? The question is, how do you use internet capabilities to aid in a mission completion? I mean, I don't even know if you'd be able to answer that.
It was when I was on the Rickover that I first owned a laptop. I took a laptop computer with me.
Yeah, in the 90s, the first LCD flip laptops.
So life has moved on a long way since then. I think that laptop computer cost me $4,000.
I think this officer asked this question retired like around 2008 to 2010. So
he probably knows more about it than I do.
I don't know, but it is an interesting question. I mean,
well, I assume that a submarine can come to periscope depth or get a message from a satellite via a wire or something, a buoy, that would download a complete picture in seconds.
Right.
Which will update the submarine plot.
I think computers are making all the decisions, and
I think our computers
captains are just making snap decisions based on information gathered by the computer systems.
But I don't think a computer is ever going to. The computer will drive you towards the optimum solution, but the human interface is required in those last moments: when to fire, when not to fire, how to evade, how to deploy countermeasures, that sort of thing, and navigation. since SSNs have gone to sea, we've had ships' inertial navigation systems, and they've become more and more sophisticated.
And people don't realize how complicated these things. These have been around since the 50s. You know, they started off on aircraft with MIT and been on submarines ever since.
But when I go into port, I'm not relying on SINs. I want a chart and a fix and a visual confirmation of my position. Right, yeah. Now, computers are good, but let me have a human being as well.
I think we were doing GPS fixes in the late 80s. I think we started doing those.
Yeah. GPS was used down in the Falklands. The submarines in the Falklands took GPS with them.
So it's been around for a while.
And they discovered that charts of the Falklands, some of which have been drawn up by Captain Cook or his contemporaries.
A little bit old.
Were a little bit old because we hadn't planned to fight down there. I think they were about 200 yards out in terms of where the rocks and the coastline were. That's not bad.
That's not bad.
200-year-old cartography.
Yeah, it's not bad at all. So those maps, speaking of old maps, they're amazingly drawn, how accurate they are. I mean, you can go into conspiracies about that, how they knew what Antarctica looked like, and who knows all that, you know. But so I mean, I hate to break it to people that are not on submarines. You know, torpedoes today, you can't hear them when they're launched.
Absolutely.
When they prosecute, you don't hear them. So the first person to get his TMA, if you will, on point and pick up the target and prosecute him, that's going to be the winner.
Yep.
So I think what they're trying to go is that, you know, they're using data communications, probably something we don't even know about, and then you know, artificial intelligence. Maybe they're talking like an EMF weapon that disables those capabilities, and then you have to go back to submarining like you've been taught. You know, do these? I mean, do they train them that way with the base set of submarining skills like you had to have in the 70s, if you will? I mean,
I don't know, but a lot of speculation there. I retired from the Royal Navy in 1992, and although I've kept in touch, I certainly haven't kept in touch with all the technology.
Yeah, I'm completely out of the loop too. I mean, I read about it, but
yeah,
the only people like said the only country bragging about its new technology seems to be Russia. I mean, we certainly
and if you brag about it, you might be trying to hide something.
I hide capabilities. So yeah, so people on my website, they're constantly seeing Russian videos and Russian articles because they put out tons of them, and I thought the same thing you just said. They're trying to.
I think they're
not as capable as they think they are.
Some of that will be disinformation.
And
that's a classic Russian tactic. Goes back hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Russians. We've got about 10-15 minutes left, I think, Eric. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You wanted me to talk about command again in Sovereign. I've just got a couple of things I wanted to touch on.
I was just looking to make sure. I think it's all the questions I got. Yeah. If you could talk about command in the Sovereign, what difference is going to a nuclear boat?
Well, I think the command of a nuclear boat is different. It's a bigger ship, more men. It has a nuclear reactor. It's a more serious, it's grown-up submarining, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And command is exercised in a more managerial fashion, I suppose. You have three heads of department. You have the XO, head of the executive department, the sailors, the weapons officer, responsible for the weapons and the electrical systems in the ship, the sensors, and then the engineering team's obviously responsible for the propulsion and the reactor. And I would deploy command decisions through those three heads of department. Mm. We didn't debate when we were in the eye of the storm, but we would have had conversations and discussions and regular get-togethers to understand, I suppose, the art of the possible and each other's strengths and weaknesses. So you operate in a different way. And of course, I was different. By the time I took command of an SSN, I was 37, I think. I was more mature. I was married. I had a wife. I had 2 children. I even had a cat. I was a different man. I'd grown up a bit more. I wasn't high on the excitement of passing Perisher. And I had my XO was command qualified. He had passed Perisher. He hadn't had a diesel boat, but he'd passed Perisher. So he had greater level of command experience that I could hand over to if I needed
class
to.
boat was a Sovereign too, so we can make sure.
He was a Swiftshore class SSN.
You said that last one, okay.
And very, very capable
Very
platform.
capable, yeah.
And having an XO that was command qualified was great. I was happy to hand over command to him if I was concentrating on some problem, or I felt he needed some experience or some learning, give him command for 5 days, or if we'd been tracking a Victor 3 for 5 days, I'd be short on sleep. I'd the sleep deficit, so I'd give him command for a couple of days whilst I caught up again. I mean, we did some good stuff in Sovereign. We tracked a number of Soviet submarines. We patrolled in some interesting areas, and we gathered intelligence.
I can't imagine what that feeling is to track in a boat that close and keep where they can't hear you, stay in their baffles, and that had to have been amazing. I still can't go into the details of that beyond the fact we did it. Yeah, you did it. Yeah.
Rest assured, it was good stuff and it was exciting. One time we went out to the Mediterranean. We had some operational work to do in the Mediterranean, but we also exercised with the US Navy, which was a very enjoyable interlude. We swapped members of crew a bit.
Really?
Okay. But first of all, we embarked some SEALs, some of your special force. They're not Marines, are they? They're naval personnel SEALs.
Yeah, they're mostly Navy, but they can be Army or Marines.
Can they?
But it's mostly Navy.
They arrived, we set it all up by signal, and these SEALs said, we'll arrive 30:30. We looked at each other in Sovereign and said, well, what does 30:30 mean? Apparently it means a helicopter flying at 30 knots, 30 feet above the water, and the SEALs just jump out.
Oh my gosh.
So 6 SEALs did this. They jumped out of their helicopter at 30 feet. They had with them a small dinghy, inflatable dinghy and a motor. They jumped out, they climbed into their little dinghy. We surfaced for 5 minutes just so that the boat was awash. They came aboard and spent the next 6 or 7 days with us. We subsequently took part in a major ASW exercise with the USS Saratoga, and we sank her. At the end of the 3-day exercise, we sank the Saratoga. And of course, initially, Saratoga's captain refused to believe that we had invaded his ASW screen and manoeuvred undetected to an attack position 1,500 yards on his port quarter.
Right.
So we sent the weapons officer over with a periscope video, and he had to admit defeat. So that was one up to the Submariners.
That's the thing with newer technology, you could bring evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And the weapons officer returned to us with baseball caps, fresh coffee, ice cream, and all sorts of good stuff. And I still, just occasionally, wear my USS Saratoga hat.
What's that all about?
That makes me a VIP, you see?
VIP, yeah.
And I wore that cap when I was in the USA last year. And we were in Boston, and my wife and I visited the Constitution.
I re-enlisted on the Constitution.
And you've got the Constitution is crewed by US personnel,
right.
But they're dressed as 18th century sailors.
Uh-huh.
And one of them recognized that I was wearing a commanding officer's cap.
And you threw him off
and
with your
said,
accent.
and said, was it genuine? Had I commanded a ship? And I explained that I was who I was.
Long drawn out answer.
Very, very proud because they rang me aboard.
Really?
So as I walked up the gangway,
yeah,
the bell was struck 4 times.
They should actually. That's proper.
Well, I wasn't expecting it. I was so impressed and proud and pleased, and
good for them.
It made me feel. I was so, and I went to see the officer later and made a special thank you. But it was excellent. But having had my command of Sovereign, I actually resigned the Navy. I
resigned.
The world was changing. By
you resigned. 22 years.
I resigned, so I decided to leave.
Uh-huh.
It was 1992. I had command of 2 ships.
Right.
I'd had a great career, but the Berlin Wall had fallen.
Yeah.
The Cold War was over.
That. Yep.
Every nation was talking about peace dividends.
Mm-hmm.
We knew the Navy was going to change. And of course, the prime purpose of the submarine service up until the early 90s
The Cold War, yeah.
was the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cold War was over.
It was
So
different.
I decided
after the drop of the wall.
I'd try a different career. Usually, having resigned, a captain would have been asked to leave the boat. But my squadron captain lobbied successfully me to stay in command, and we took Sovereign into refit 5 months later. The last trip I made was pretty stark contrast to my subsequent life. We transited around the north of Scotland, and you've been there,
yeah.
Eric. You know, it was foul weather. We had to go surfaced close to
all the time.
That's it. We were passing close to the Orkneys, and I had to spend a lot of time on the bridge in confined navigational waters. And when I came below, my personal steward had a fresh, clean towel for me to dry myself with, gave me a clean shirt. There was a pot of coffee in a silver pot, and a sandwich already in my cabin. 3 days later, I'd left the Navy. I was a student at college studying for an MBA, and the response to my question of where's the coffee was, get your own expletive deleted coffee.
Yeah.
And the change from being in command to being a student was quite a dramatic shift.
Yeah, it had to be.
I've no great insights into command and leadership. I know my submarine career and my time in command stood me in good stead in my civilian life. Following my MBA, I went to work in the healthcare sector. And I spent 25 years in different roles in the healthcare sector. Mm-hmm. And when people remarked that it must be strange to be managing a hospital or a group of hospitals, as I did, after being at sea in command of submarines, my reply was that there were far more similarities than differences, really.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
At sea in command of a submarine, there are 3 critical elements. There's communication. Mm-hmm. Make sure the crew know what you expect of them, the standards you're setting, and where you're going. And there are many channels. You can written orders, speeches, but I always found that by walking around the ship, taking coffee with the engineers in their spaces or the weapons team in the fore ends, where I was able to just conversations, explain, discuss and illustrate what I wanted and get feedback, was hugely useful part of it. But communications, and never ever forget the praise in public, criticize in private. That was always an important element of that.
In the commercial sector, that's very valuable if you cross it over.
And then training, give the crew the skills and confidence to do the job you want them to do.
Right.
And then equipment, ensure you have the best equipment you can muster to do the job. And those 3 elements applied equally in a hospital as in a ship. And I believe they apply in any leadership role, whether it's a factory, a church, a racetrack, wherever.
Usually
the leader
best
must,
because on
must,
the submarine
must communicate.
You got the best of the best. Even if they were enlisted, they're the best of the best, and you're in command of the best of the best. And then you go to hospitals, and hospitals have doctors in them, and they got obviously nurses, and then they have administrative stuff. Still high caliber people. So you already know, you've been trained years for leading high caliber people, if you will. So.
Leading doctors was always an interesting exercise. I don't know how well. I do know what doctors are like in America because I spent time at some of your hospitals in both New York and Houston, Texas, and in Nashville. But the average senior doctor has a brain the size of a small planet, and an ego, and an ego to go with it. Exactly. And managing them is not not
My
easy.
wife's in healthcare. That's I know about it. Yeah.
But having had command of a submarine, there was some degree of mutual respect there that helped me. In that. But I also remember in hospitals, the first job I had, in my first hospital, I was responsible for a part of the hospital, which included the combined heat and power plant. So I did what any submarine captain would do. I went and checked my area of responsibility. I walked around it.
Engineer
and I went
spaces.
to the combined. And I went, yeah, exactly. I went to the combined heat and power plant, and the staff there were amazed. They'd never seen a manager before, because managers don't put overalls on and come down to the boiler room.
Too, right?
Yeah. But submariners do.
Yeah,
so that's what I did,
and
that worked. It worked for me. Eric, that kind of concludes my
we could be going
my
an hour
unloading
and a half
to tonight. It's 1 o'clock in the morning here in Cornwall.
Yeah, it's getting late, and it's amazing talk, sir. I'm really, like I said,
well, I hope it's been of interest again. It's certainly been interesting for me, because I've had to go back and reflect to prepare for these conversations.
And we're going to do one more part. Don't know when yet, but because you said you're volunteering at a museum and you're a vital part of this Cold War exhibit, and they're preparing a nuclear boat for be part of that museum. Yeah,
I'd like to talk about it. I think that would probably be slightly shorter, but I'll certainly talk you through the whys and wherefores of why we're doing that and why we think it's
maybe
important.
we can go more into the Cold War doctrine a little bit. Maybe there's some stuff we can discuss that's not classified anyways.
I'll see what I can dig out.
Yeah, that's but
Eric, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I'm happy you reached out again. I mean, it's an amazing chance to hear about the Perisher right from the horse's mouth, if you will. I mean, this is a guy that's done it, been through it, commanded different type boats. So we're satisfying both my older market who was on diesel boats, and then maybe some of the newer, like my age group, and certainly the younger on the nuclear boats. You got crossed over and covered all that, and there was definitely things of interest that were discussed during this discussion and your presentation. I thank you. So, hey, this is Eric with the Subvet.com again, and I appreciate Commander Ian Whitehouse being with us tonight, talking about the Perisher. You can contact me at thesubvet@gmail.com if you want to reach out and come aboard our podcast. Our podcast, as you see, is a video podcast, so it's a very explicit discussion. So not so much, we don't like to use a lot of bad language, but we like to have high caliber guests like this. And you don't have to be a commander. You could have been a non-commissioned officer in charge of a sonar division, as far as it goes. So everything's of interest. Come on, talk about with thesubvet.com. Then you can reach our Facebook group by typing in the Subvet on Facebook. You can join that, get your daily news feeds. The same on Twitter at the Subvet as well. Hey, and everybody, we appreciate you listening to this podcast. This is Eric with the Subvet.com, the Sailor's Choice, 13